Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to an episode of the Breaking the Game podcast. We're going to skip our video today because we today have a very special guest, Mr. David Shepard. Austin, why don't you introduce him to the listeners?
Yeah, well, first off, David, thank you for being with us. For anybody who doesn't know, David is the host of the Good Shepherd podcast on YouTube. He's also a producer and on-air talent for XM radio, the NBA radio on Sirius XM, and he's a writer for CBS Sports Radio. How you doing, David?
I'm good. Austin, Steven, thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. So it's been a crazy busy couple of days for you, I'm sure. You know, the draft and all these free agency, tweets from Woj every 2 minutes, it seems like.
Yeah, that would be fair to say.
Absolutely, yeah. We were up last night with the draft until about like midnight, just in the first round. So it was we have it, and we have a running article on our website where we keep up with the latest transactions and then give like analysis and grades and stuff. So yeah, we've been all over the place as well, brother. So we understand how it goes.
Oh yeah.
Well, I don't need to spend too much time on this, but I do want to say that your job is kind of like the dream job for both Steven and I think, getting to work for NBA radio. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we love it.
So, what did you think about the draft last night? Was there any big surprises for in your mind, or did you kind of see it going down that way, the way it went down?
I thought it kind of happened the way it should have. I would have taken Weissman first. I think there's too much of an upside. I agree. Right. I think what he did in his first game, basically out rebounding the whole starting lineup, and I know it was against, I believe it was like South Carolina State, but he just looked like a man amongst boys from day one, and that's the upside you want to see. I mean, Anthony Edwards is a heck of a player, and obviously we know his youth. I mean, he should be a freshman now, but the reality is, guys, you talk about an Anthony Edwards who was on a losing team. And that to me is troubling. I mean, Ben Simmons, he didn't exactly bring a winning culture to Philadelphia. Now, granted, his talent can get you to the playoffs. No question about that. But then we see the holes, we see the deficiencies when he gets into that second round, of that nature. But look, Patrick Williams going 4, I was a little surprised. And I got to tell you, Obi Toppin going 8. I think the Knicks better be thanking their lucky stars, and if you're Spike Lee, you're seeing to the heavens right now.
Well, how about the Sacramento Kings having Tyrese Halliburton fall into their laps? What do you think about that?
I love it, man. I love it. I've had a chance to speak to him. He's a great, great kid. He's one of those guys. I love his interviews. He's one of those guys who you meet and you say, I want that kid on my team. If nothing else, because I know he is going to be about more than himself. And that's what you want. That's what you want as a rookie. You don't want any rookie coming in thinking they're better than the team. That is going to lead to a lot of tension and stray from day one.
Right. I agree. Go ahead, Austin.
Okay, I was just going to say. Sorry, Steven. I was just going to say that, I listened to one interview with Tyrese Halliburton on NBA radio, and I was just, gushing about how much I liked the way he carried himself and the way he talked and just his leadership qualities from that standpoint. It's not a lot of, 19, 20-year-old kids that are willing to play a role for a team when they think they're, they should be the star. Right. So I was always pretty high on him. So, Steven, you were going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, I like Halliburton a lot, David. He was number 4 on my board overall behind, your typical 3 that you were hearing about.
Okay.
With the exception of Edwards. I actually had Edwards at 6 due to, the effort, the way that he interviews too. Like, I don't know if you give a guy like that, the privilege of being a number 1 overall pick, the highest amount of money compared to any other rookie coming into the league, and thinking that throwing all those like great things at him fixes those kind of like character deficiencies or effort or consistency deficiencies, if you will. But I was really high on Halliburton, and when you listen to him interview, and you just said that you had him on, so right? But he kind of gives me a Damian Lillard type vibe, just from the leadership, the confidence in of himself and his teammates around him, no matter who they are. Like, do you see any sort of correlation with that?
He's not going to be as good as Damian Lillard.
Well, right. I'm just saying, like the personality wise, like the way that he kind of talks about himself and his teammates. I saw a little bit of that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. I would see, the thing is, like, when you're as good as Dame, like, you have to have an unhealthy ego. You know what I mean?
Right.
He reminds me more of, I want to say somebody like a Luke Walton, like a guy that's just going to come in and be the most likable person. A guy like Bismack Biyombo, someone like that. They're going to come in, they're going to give you great energy, they're going to be the ultimate team guy. But when you're someone like Damian Lillard, we're talking an all-NBA first-team player, eventually a first-ballot Hall of Famer. You don't come in with anything but a chip on your shoulder. And I don't know if the personalities align in that regard.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Definitely. Listen, a broken clock is right twice a day. So
you ain't lying.
Don't steal that line though, because I stole it.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Don't worry, we won't. So the first thing of yours that I actually came across was your little podcast episode about the Steve Nash hire, and how white privilege didn't have anything to do with that hire. Did you think that was a good hire for the Nets? Do you like Steve Nash as a head coach, or do you think he's going to struggle with that team?
I think it's going to be tricky because you have a guy in Kevin Durant, you have a guy in Kyrie Irving. I think it's just going to be tricky. I think at that point, I mean, what are you going to say to Kevin Durant? What are you going to say to a two-time Finals MVP? What are you going to say to one of the top 20 players to ever live? What are you going to say to a Kyrie Irving? They know they're dealing with a new coach. It's as great as Nash is as a player, it's a different beast being a head coach of a team. Now, he has their respect, but does he have their respect as a head coach? Because Kevin Durant was a peer of Nash for a long time. Obviously Kyrie Irving played a significant amount of years against Nash. I mean, Irving came in the league in 2011, so he was facing off against Nash when he was still an all-star. So that's going to be difficult, depending on what happens with Harden, whether, rumors are circulating, and there's certainly an ample amount of speculation that James Harden's going to end up in the BK. So that's going to be a tricky situation. I mean, we saw what happened with Jason Kidd. I don't know if Garnett and Pierce really looked at him as a head coach.
Yeah, that's a good point about Jason Kidd. He definitely struggled, at least in his first year or two. Right. Steven and I have kind of taken to calling Brooklyn the Brooklyn social club instead of the Brooklyn Nets, right? Because we kind of it's just going to be an interesting group of personalities and
drinking wine and doing paintings and playing hacky sack with each other and stuff like that. It's a lot of eclectic personalities there. I think though it's like the way I've been saying it, David. I know I'm not the only one that shares this sentiment, right? But it's either going to be boom or bust. Like it's either going to be the perfect formula with all of these kind of like more polarizing personalities in the NBA. Like they're either going to be like, what, guys, everyone hates us. That's fine. We got each other and we'll just go to the finals in year 1 or 2. Or it's just going to be like, what, guys, we're not friends anymore. Like we're not going to kind of like how Harden and Westbrook went, right? Like Houston was like, we're going to trade away Chris Paul and bring in Russell Westbrook and it'll be fine because they're friends. And we just saw how that went this season, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting for sure. What are your thoughts on free agency and the sped up timeline of the off season? Do you think it was a good idea for the NBA to start, on December 22nd, or do you think they should have waited?
Yeah, I mean, from a revenue standpoint, they had to do that.
Yeah,
right.
You know what I mean? They absolutely had to do that. So I don't blame them whatsoever. It was obvious. It was honestly like a no brainer. Like it was one of those things. Like it was a must. Like there was no choice behind it. They already lost so much revenue with COVID, and that's not the NBA's fault.
Right.
Yeah, and it's also, I think it's kind of weird too, right? Because the NBA was like they were priding themselves, and rightfully so, right? Like how they conducted themselves in the bubble, and they were not shy on saying like, hey, maybe the government should do what we're doing, right? And like everybody isolate and stay away from each other. And now they're looking at like college football, professional football, all these other places where they're allowing people in. And yes, some people are exposing themselves to COVID and they're having to deal with scheduling conflicts and stuff like that, right? But the NBA, they did the right thing, lost a lot of money. These other places are doing it contrary to what the NBA did, and they're making money, right? So like obviously that had to do a little bit with their decision to say, all right, guys, maybe we just kind of have to suck it up and do what's best for the buck,
Absolutely. I mean, Adam Silver is one of the, I think, guys, what I'd be really interested to see, Austin and Steven, is if they ever do some type of documentary on how they came about this bubble, because it's fascinating what they were able to do. I mean, aside from maybe Lou Williams, and that's just a knucklehead decision. I mean, you're talking about a 15-year veteran that just knows better. He's too smart for that. But it was damn near perfect how the NBA went about this. And you look at the tragedy that is, more than 250,000 deaths right now, COVID, and you're talking about no positive tests. I believe I don't quote me on the specifics, but I want to say it seemed like 2 or 3 months there were zero forget hospitalizations and untimely deaths. We're talking about zero positive tests for 2-3 months.
Right. That was pretty impressive. Steven and I kind of followed that, running on our show as the bubble progressed, and every week it was just another week with no positive tests. And it was great to see that it worked out the way it did. I wasn't really skeptical because I'm with you guys and thinking that, Adam Silver can kind of do no wrong. So
I'll trust him first and deal with whatever kind of, crow eating I have to do afterwards. Adam Silver is a pretty, him in a circle, whoever they are, right? Like they do a pretty good job of analyzing every avenue and then typically making the better decision, right?
Right, exactly.
Excellent stuff.
So I was just wondering, this is kind of more of a personal question than anything because I'm interested. What's it like working on NBA radio for Sirius XM?
It takes its toll.
Yeah.
It takes its toll. There's a lot of pressure. To be honest with you, I mean, I work for a man named Sean Butler, who's a program director, and he's phenomenal. He's outstanding. So in that regard, the people that I work with are great. It's the pressure that comes with representing the NBA. Being the official, station to the NBA, it has a lot of weight behind it. So I don't take it for granted, but you're expected every single day. Even right now, as I'm talking with you guys and wanting to give you my undivided attention, I got people reaching out to me. I got people texting me. So it's just ongoing. I got a show that I got to start preparing for the second I get off the phone with you guys. I then got to do a 3-hour show. I got to run the board. I got to produce. I got to take calls. I got to come up with the content. I got to put the PDT in. I got to make sure we're on demand. Then I got to make sure that there's an audiogram. I got to make sure that our guests, that there's a certain amount of reads, sound check. I got to make sure that we're hitting on this interview. I got to make sure we're doing this liner before the interview, after the interview. I want to make sure that we're taking over from Galaxy. We're putting it into the Zeta system. And I didn't even cover maybe 90% of what we need to be doing in Sirius XM NBA radio.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, hey David, we know that you got to run here within the next couple of minutes. We certainly appreciate you giving us, the 13 minutes of your time. We'll just put it out there for anybody who wants to see all the great work that David does. He has his own, he's the Good Shepherd, right, on YouTube. He has that going on. He's obviously a part of, Sirius XM Radio, CBS Sports, writing and all of that, right? So all the places where you can find big NBA news and stuff, David's got his hands in it, right? He's involved with a lot of different areas. So Austin, you want to go ahead and let David go, or
real quick. Did the Bucks do enough to keep Giannis, or do you think he's gone?
Ooh.
We'll see what happens with Holiday. It depends on one name, and that's a name that a lot of people want to see these next 2 months go smooth. Holiday. It's kind of appropriate, huh? The Bucks want to get Holiday.
Right? There you go. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time. We'll let you go and do, all of those things that you said that weren't even like a quarter of your schedule that you got going on today. It just means a lot to Austin and I that you gave us a little bit of your time today, David.
It's my pleasure, guys. And just very quickly, I just want to say you guys are very professional. You guys handle yourselves like gentlemen. Thank you for making this easy for me to come on. Thank you for giving me the platform to come on and talk NBA and Sirius XM with you. Your time is 100% as valuable as mine. I know you guys know that, but don't ever think anything less of that for a second. So I appreciate y'all having me. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that. You have a blessed day, David.
Thanks, gentlemen. You do the same, Stephen. Austin.
Have a good one.
Gentlemen.
All right, you too now. Bye. All right, how cool was that, Austin?
Right, that was pretty awesome. I was definitely a little nervous at first, a little bit. He's kind of got my dream job. He's been a researcher for ESPN. He works for a big time radio station. He works for the NBA radio. Like, how much better would it get?
Yeah, so I love that.
That was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking Sirius XM radio where you got guys who played in the league, guys like Antonio Daniels, people like that, right? Who are, Sam Mitchell, right? Like guys who have played and guys who have coached. And, we just, interface with a guy that, did all of those things. Like, did you catch most of what he said that he had to do?
Yeah, a little bit of it. A lot of it was stuff that I've never even heard of before.
Right. So I mean, it's definitely one of those things, right, Austin, where it sounds like a dream, and it certainly would. Like, I mean, to be able to be at that level, it obviously does take some sacrifice and a lot of effort and planning and stuff like that, right? But the bigger the responsibility, the bigger the responsibilities that come along with it, right?
Right. And the one thing that really just kind of stuck out in my mind when I was reading a little bit about his career and his profile online is he's in charge of booking all the talent for every show on NBA radio and Mad Dog Sports, which is, so 2 separate radio stations.
Yeah, completely different channels.
And not only that, you have to work with some really big time personalities, guys that have won Emmys and stuff for, their work on the radio, like Justin Termini, some of those guys. Frank Isola, if you watch ESPN, he's been on there a lot.
Yeah.
So it would be, I understand what he means when he says it's extremely stressful and a lot of pressure for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we just got done talking about how he was like, I just talked to Tyrese Halliburton the other day, and how cool is that, right? Like, and the fact that he gave us a little bit of time, like, I think that speaks to one, how humble he is, right? Like, just the way that he exited and and spoke glowingly about us and stuff like that. And, not saying that we aren't, capable of being able to conduct an interview or anything like that, right? But the fact that he, was willing to make that time, and before the show, everybody who's listening or watching now, like, he let me know well ahead in advance today that he had some stuff come up at 6:30, and you just listened to everything that he said that he had to do, right? And he was like, "Hey, Steven, I just want to let you know," and I'm not gonna put that out there. Never mind. But he was saying like, "Hey, man, I just want to let you know that I had something come up. I really still want to be on the show. Can we make this time available? And even though it's only going to be a little bit of time, I still want to do the show with you, gentlemen, right?" So like, I thought that was, the guy that's interviewing NBA players is like, "Hey guys, like, I want to give you guys my undivided attention." So I thought,
it makes me feel pretty proud for him to say that, all that stuff he has to do and all these different jobs he has and how busy he is to still make time for, little old us, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
Is pretty awesome. So it does speak to how, down to earth of a guy he is. But I can't help but be a little, proud that he was able to come on our show. I think it went well.
Yeah, I mean, and he has looked at our work, and obviously we're doing something right, Austin, in our infancy stages here. This is episode 23, and we just got a guy who books for Sirius XM radio. So yeah, I know that in situations like this, right, you're supposed to be professional and stuff like this. You're supposed to act like you've been there before. But like, at the end of the day, like, I still feel I feel like a 15-year-old kid, right? Like, I feel just like, oh man, cool. Like, I just got to interview David Shepard. That's pretty awesome.
Like,
right?
In the back of my mind, it's like this guy interviews NBA players and famous people. We can't sound like fools when we're trying to ask them questions.
Yeah. And when we were talking over each other, which we do a little bit, but I felt like we did a little bit more than normal at the beginning of the show, right? We were just like, no, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that.
It's almost like a scene from one of those dumb comedy movies.
Yeah. Well, we still want to be able to have a show worth listening and watching to, right? We're not just going to talk about, oh my gosh, David Shepard, even though it was really cool that he was on, right? But we do want to catch up on a little bit of news that's happening, right? And my buddy Dre, he just came on here and says, keep attacking the process. I appreciate that very much, Dre.
Thank you.
That when I was trying to do my own network before, I had a change of plans and schedule and stuff like that. Dre was a part of the network for a little bit too, and so I think it's cool that that we still have contact with our friends like that, right? So
that's one of the best things that I think I've gotten out of this podcast, and just Off the Ball Network and everything that we've done in general is just all the awesome people that I've met. Like, I wish everybody that listens to us or everybody that's out there really could have the kind of group message we have on Twitter. Like, it's awesome. It's not every day. It's not every day you find a group of guys like that that we all get along and respect each other as well as we do, and we're all hard workers, and we've got a lot of really good, talented people. So.
And not only that, but like, we don't
a lot of good things.
We don't just talk about sports. Like, we got, like, it's a fellowship, right? Like, I can't help to bring, I go to a church. Like, I I am, Christian and stuff like that, right? So it's
me too.
It's fellow. I'm not saying that you're not. I'm just, for those who don't know, but it's fellowship. It really is. It's doing life with one another, right? And then it's iron sharpening iron and stuff like that, right? So it was pretty cool to be able to do this, right? But
right.
And my buddy Dre, our buddy Dre, just came on and said, "Very true. Appreciate you there, Dre." But let's talk about a little bit about some news. David did touch on it, and this is a big story.
Yes,
we covered it a little bit on our draft show yesterday. And if you didn't get a chance, first off, to watch the draft show that we did, I know that the picks and stuff are already in, but if you want to just see us at the Off the Ball Network kind of have a good time with one another, you can go to the facebook.com/Off the Ball Network, and it's still available on there. I believe it was at like almost 1,000 views or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So it was pretty successful. But we talked about the Klay Thompson injury, right? And we looked at the way that the Warriors were going to draft, and they were long suspected prior to Klay's injury that they were going to get James Wiseman. I felt that was the best pick. We just heard David kind of echo that same sentiment, right? I look at him and I see shades of Chris Bosh, except a better defender. Maybe he's not going to be as versatile on the offensive end, but, the touch around the basket, the athleticism, his ability to run the floor, a lot of things remind me of young Chris Bosh coming out of Georgia Tech. So hours prior to their pick, Klay Thompson is out there doing what he's supposed to do, trying to get ready for the NBA season. And, he gets injured in one leg, which shut down his season last year. The opposite leg, he has what we now know is an Achilles injury, which is going to prohibit him from playing this upcoming season, Austin. They still go ahead and draft the guy that they really wanted in James Wiseman instead of a LaMelo Ball was available, certainly. With the injury, I even said on the show, I said that, they're giving this ball a yarn, right? And they're saying, quick, you have to untangle this. And you're saying, all right, I don't have Klay Thompson. I'm going to draft James Wiseman. Okay. But, I can't trade for a star now, because if I do, I'm still down a star. Right. So, you pull that and you're like, okay, now I have to trade all my draft picks. I have to trade, Wiggins as well. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier on that group chat, saying, what if they trade for Bradley Beal? They're still down. They're still down a guy. And in order to get a guy like that, you could bet that the Wizards are going to want James Wiseman now. Right. So, and that next year's first round pick out of Minnesota, it's a lot to have to deal with, Austin. Do you think that the Warriors standing pat is the best way to go? Or do you think that they should try to shake it up?
Well, first off, in terms of drafting Wiseman, I don't think there was going to be anything close to a replacement in this draft at all for Klay Thompson. I don't think that's where they're going to find that if that's what they're trying to do. So, I wasn't against the pick, even with the injury. I think Wiseman is, going to be an absolute monster. He's not like a lot of these, raw big men that they talk about that have no offensive skill or touch around the basket. Like, he's got incredible hands. He's incredibly quick, just in terms of physical looks. He reminds me a lot of like a young David Robinson in terms of how, just like filled out he already is and how he's just massive.
Yeah. He's chiseled.
So I don't think there's a whole lot of chance that he's not going to be, a perennial starter for the next 15 years in this league. So I think they did good there. But honestly, I don't know that they should try to go out and get a star to replace Klay Thompson, because even if he was going to be healthy this year, this is a completely different team than it was with Kevin Durant and even before. Iguodala's gone. Sean Livingston's gone. And, those guys were big, important pieces. So this team's not nearly as deep as it used to be. Even guys like Quinn Cook had, a lot of impact on that team.
Leandro Barbosa, and David West, those guys were, Andrew Bogut,
So,
Looney is coming off of an injury still,
obviously the Splash Brothers, if they were healthy and back to their normal selves, we're going to compete in the West, even though the West's loaded, with Wiggins as their third guy. I think I was excited to see what Wiggins could do in kind of a, complementary role instead of being expected to be, the star like he was in Minnesota. But he's going to have to kind of do a little bit more now, it seems like. But I think they should stand pat, and financially, like, it makes way too much sense not to try to add any more money to their salary. cap because they're already in the tax. And I saw a tweet earlier that by adding that $14 million contract of Kelly Oubre's, if they do, it's going to cost like $85 million in tax penalties.
Yeah, because there's, I think it's like a 60 tax. Yeah, it's a $68 million tax on top of the contract that he has at $14.4 million. Now, I will say that, and I forget the gentleman that I follow, but he shared it on Twitter, and he said, Warrior fans are lucky to have Joe Lacob, and that stuck with me and resonated with me so hard because it's like he reminds me of the guy who wanted to start Jurassic Park. You remember the old gentleman with the white hat and the beard. Yeah, he said, what was the saying he said all the time on the movie? Spared no expense. He wants to do this for the people. Like he does not care. He actually took out a credit prior to this season even starting because they just opened up a brand new stadium. They're one of the leading teams in the NBA right now looking to do advanced testing. They believe that they can fill their stadium up to 100% capacity based on the medical research that they're putting in to trying to make going to a Warriors game as fun and as safe as possible. So when you consider that the Warriors have a guy like Joe Lacob who's doing all that already, looks at Tsunami Papi, who I mentioned in a few shows, I think that he has like a very Warriors type vibe. Like, remember when the story came out that Klay Thompson one night just ran in the beach and went swimming in the middle of the night? Like, you don't think that Kelly Oubre Jr. would see Klay Thompson do that and be like, hey, man, I'm going to come with you. You know what I mean? Like
they just seem like a fun group of guys all around. That whole team, just like they're obviously very serious about their craft, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but they just seem like a bunch of dudes going out and playing basketball, like it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I just think it would be a great place to play. Going to Golden State doesn't solve all the problems in the world. It's not like they're just going to magically, shake off this injury. But I will say, if anybody in the NBA's game is going to be the least affected by, recovery from an Achilles injury, it's probably Klay Thompson. The dude dribbled like 13 times in the last decade. So, he doesn't have to really move around a whole lot, or, his defense will be affected. Obviously, nobody's ever the same from when they come back from an Achilles injury. So, it's going to be rough for him. It'll be 2 full years that he's going to have missed, at this point now. And that's just a long time. This right now, this period we're in, the last year and this year should have kind of been like the peak for the Splash Brothers. And instead we're not going to get to see it. And it's too bad.
It really is. And, you consider not only coming back from last year's injury, that he was going to, still have to get in NBA game shape. Like he'd been training, he'd been practicing. Like that's how he got injured, right? Trying to get ready for the upcoming season. He was still not going to be right. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying he wouldn't have been good or productive or anything like that, but he wasn't going to be the Klay Thompson that we saw prior.
Right. He's not going to be out there defending the best perimeter player on the other team every night like he was. He's not going to, be out there for at least probably the first month or two of the season. He was probably going to be on a minute restriction.
Correct.
Just because you got to get in shape. Like just, anybody that's listening that doesn't understand what we mean about game shape, just go to your local gym or your local Y and run 2 or 3 pickup games in a row and see if you're not dead afterwards. Because basketball shape is a little different than just regular exercise.
Yeah, and you talk about this injury, right? He probably wasn't going to be coming back off of last year's injury, 100% until maybe halfway through this season, maybe coming into the following season. But now you're talking about Klay Thompson now, right? Coming off of another injury. Right now, he's 30 years old, so he's my age. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about him like he's a dinosaur. And he's younger than you, so I'm not going to do that for both of our sakes, right? But you're talking about Klay Thompson probably not being back at 100%, if ever, until the age of 32. And
just think about how hard the recovery from a torn ACL is, and then to just almost be there. And now he's not only got to work on rebuilding the strength in that leg and in that knee, but he's also got to worry about his other leg, his Achilles, and he's got to worry about, how kind of balancing, recovery from both injuries. I'm sure having the ACL will definitely make the recovery from the Achilles a lot harder. Or it's just think about like the mental aspect of it too. Just, it'd be hard to not get pretty down on yourself in that kind of situation.
Well, right. He just had a commercial come out this last year, right? Where he was, in there, like the commercial was him working out and working back to get from the season and, looking to prove everybody who thinks that the Warriors were done wrong. Right. And that it had to be decimating, right? And, throughout the draft night, we saw folks like, Mark Stein, Stephen A. Smith, Shams, Woj, everybody who's anybody that covers the league, at that level and that intensity was dropping, clues and stuff saying like, yeah, this is a heel injury. So that kind of pointed to the, what we all suspected to be an ACL. They were all saying that it simply just doesn't look good, that all of his teammates were making preparations to go and see him. Everyone was, doing the prayers up emojis and stuff like that. So all that's well and good, but, all of that just one after another in such a short fashion, like it just felt like it was going to be something bad that we just had to wait for the news the next day.
And when you hear heel injury, at least for me, there's one of three things that comes to mind. It's an Achilles, it's plantar fasciitis, which can take months to get back from. It's difficult to deal with, or what's called an avulsion fracture, which is what Brett Favre had in his last year in the NFL, where the heel bone actually breaks, and instead of the tendon tearing, it actually pulls a piece of the bone off. So that doesn't sound fun.
No.
So any real way this could have gone, it wasn't going to be a quick turnaround for him. Like he wasn't going to come back in a few weeks and be okay from it. It was going to be a long injury regardless.
Yeah, and there was optimism too, right? Because they were saying that they could see movement in the calf and things like that. So there was some sort of optimism, but season ending is not like, you just feel bad, right? Because as many people hated on the Warriors and, they were just like, oh, great, we got to watch the Warriors win another championship. Like, it was still one of the best teams of all time. And like, even you could criticize Kevin Durant and everybody did, you could criticize the Warriors and Draymond Green and everybody did. But to be able to say that you watch probably one of the greatest basketball teams ever assembled. And then like, if injuries didn't happen, you're talking about a team that could have had DeMarcus Cousins. You know what I mean? Like, so you legitimately had 5 All-Stars on the team at one time. Right. You're talking about like the Boston Celtics in their heyday. You know what I mean? Like
when there was 8 NBA teams.
Right. Yeah. That's also helps, so, but now you're up to 30 and, only 15 players make an All-Star team. You had legitimately a third of an All-Star team all on the Golden State Warriors.
And not only that, you had, 2 guys that have won MVP awards. One's a multiple time winner, 2 of arguably the 5 best players in the world at the time, along with arguably the best shooter or one of the 2 best shooters in the NBA currently. And then, Draymond Green was probably the definition of a glue guy at that time, So it was.
And by the way, a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Andre Iguodala, a 6th Man of the Year candidate in Andre Iguodala, a Finals MVP in Andre Iguodala.
Sean Livingston, who was touted as one of the next great superstar point guards that was going to change the position before he had that really bad knee injury that he had. That was one of the worst I've ever seen. His leg was like completely turned around. But
David Wett's a multiple time All-Star, Leandro Barbosa,
Andrew Bogut was a number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, like
that team was ridiculous. So
and you won't see teams like that don't happen very much, and it's like, and again, you could criticize it, and a lot of people did, even though no rules were broken. But, people criticize that team. But the fact that, like, if you're just an NBA fan in general, and you can say, someday, Austin, you and I are going to look at our grandkids when we hate the way the NBA is played, maybe, if we ever get to that point, and we can say,
when there's 4-point shots.
Yeah, back in my days, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were the best shooting backcourt ever, like it.
Right. I kind of think about like the old Phoenix Suns teams of Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, the 7 seconds or less.
They got me into basketball.
Right. How fun they were to watch. And then to hear when they were talking about it with Sean Marion, they wouldn't even be, I think their pace would have been like 25th in the league this year. They wouldn't even really be keeping up with the way the game's played now. So it's crazy to see, where it's gone from there. And
the Orlando Magic, we talked about them when we evaluated the coaching hirings, right? With the New Orleans Pelicans bringing in Stan Van Gundy, who, brought in that pick and roll heavy, 1 out or 4 out, 1 in mentality with Dwight Howard, and he took them to the NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. So, and again, like all those teams say, if we knew then what we know now, excuse me, I don't know why that was so hard for me, but
I meant what you knew.
Yeah, there you go. Right. You're welcome for that one, by the way. but they always say we wish we would have did more of that at that time instead of, worrying about what everyone was saying. It's like, that's not good basketball. That's not the way basketball is supposed to be played.
Right. And I kind of think that's what the Houston Rockets tried to do with their, hero ball style of play with James Harden. Rather than, try to get him to not do it, they kind of doubled down on it more than once. And, they get criticized for it because it didn't work. But I don't think it was the system that was necessarily the reason. It was more just the guy that it was built for. Is just he's not the guy that's going to take you to the promised land and hit those big shots in the last moment. So
yeah,
I liked that the Houston Rockets tried to do it their own way and, gave it as good a shot as they did. And, I kind of feel like the next evolution that we're going to see in the NBA is kind of what like the Miami Heat have now with that guy that they drafted from Memphis, just big freak athlete.
Oh, Precious Achiuwa.
Achiuwa. Him and Bam Adebayo, if this guy's anything like Bam, like they're saying he is, having two playmaking big athletic forwards like that, that may be the next thing we see that the league copycats. And, I think Miami's in a good spot.
Well, and I'm not as high on Precious as a lot of folks are, right? And, I've been wrong before, but, he's going to be offensively limited. I mean, you saw that in Memphis too. And he had once Wiseman, the whole scandal thing came out with his parents accepting things and, all that fun stuff, right? It was Precious's team. And like that offense around Precious is just not now defensively. That's where you see the Bam comparisons, right? Like everyone says that he can guard 1 through 5, and people say that about a lot of players, but that's really, really difficult to do, especially for like a 19, 20-year-old guy who hasn't even touched an NBA court. And you're going to be already saying, because he's the same height, roughly the same width, same, physical dimensions and stuff like that.
Athleticism.
Yeah. Like, oh, this is another Bam Adebayo. Like, that's lofty praise, because when Bam came into the league, nobody knew that Bam was going to be who he is now. Because Bam, for his credit in Kentucky, he was an elbow shooter. Like, he was a very good mid-range shooter, but he was a mid-range shooter and he was a dunker. He was not a shot creator for others. He was a capable defender, but he wasn't asked to do nearly what Memphis is allowing him to do. Plus, he had the benefit to play behind a guy like Hassan Whiteside, who isn't my cup of tea, but, there was no pressure on him to come in and be like the next something. You know what I mean?
Miami's future wasn't hinging on his, development into a star. Like, it turns out that it may actually now, but that wasn't the plan all along. It wasn't like he was the guy that was supposed to have all the pressure on him to take them to the next level. And I also think it kind of speaks to Eric Spoelstra's coaching that, he gives these guys the ability to kind of grow their game and do more and more as they develop. And a lot of coaches wouldn't be willing to put, the playmaking duties in the hands of a young power forward who was seen as offensively limited when he first came into the league. So I think you got to give credit to Spoelstra and just their player development in Miami. I think they talk about the Heat culture all the time. I think they're one of the best franchises in the entire NBA when it comes to that kind of stuff.
And you're correct. And when I evaluated Precious Achiuwa, and I was hearing, it wasn't even until like this month I started hearing like Precious Achiuwa may be a first-round pick. I'm like, from what? Like, I don't know if it's a product of having too much time to evaluate players. I don't know if it was the fact that all we had was game film, and then we started seeing like these combine measurements and stuff come out, and like, oh, new information. Let's only dissect this now. You know what I mean? Like, I think that probably helped him climb up the boards, because this young man is he's physically gifted among physically gifted people. Like he stands out physically amongst his peers. So that certainly helps. And people love measurements. People care about hand size. They care about, lateral,
makes no sense.
Cone drills and stuff like this. You're never going to have to run cones in an NBA game. Right. But it shows certain things that represent somewhat what you're going to do on an NBA floor, supposedly.
I would be hard pressed to believe if you asked every single scout that was at the NBA, that goes to the NBA Combine for all those measurements, if there was anything that actually surprised them about any of these guys. You know what I mean? It's just a way to put numbers in those slots on a sheet, because I feel like, they know what these guys are capable of doing athletically well before they get to the combine. Maybe some of the, the international players, it's a little bit different, or some unknown guys might step up and have a big day, but it's not like you're going to find out that one of these top 15 picks can't jump or can't, is way slower than you thought.
Au contraire, I would say, well, I'm not going to say most, I will say mostly you're correct. But in the 2007 draft, I would say that the combine is the reason why Kevin Durant was selected 2nd overall instead of number 1 overall with Greg Oden, because he talks about this, laughingly now, and rightfully so. When he had to do the bench press and everyone's like, this guy can't even lift a dump. He's like, I don't care. I can still ball. Like I can still be one of the best scorers in NBA history. Like,
this isn't the NFL where, you're constantly pushing on a guy like an offensive lineman. Like, when in an NBA game do you need bench press? It's just,
one would argue that forearm extended that people like to do now when they go up for a layup. You got to be able to push people off of you. But I understand what you're saying.
When you're 7 feet tall and you can shoot the lights out, you don't need to push people off of you nearly as much as most guys either. So
yeah, and you have a tight handle too.
And it brings up a good point that you were talking about. Too much time to evaluate these players. I kind of think that this year was the ultimate case of that. For one, I don't think there was a consensus number 1 pick because there was no NCAA tournament, and that's kind of where guys, really get seen by a lot of the viewing public. At least, they make their name. There was going to be somebody like maybe an Obi Toppin. If he had taken Dayton to the Final Four and had a great NCAA tournament, he would probably have been the consensus number 1 pick. But we had so much time to pick apart all of these kids. Just look at them. Everything about Anthony Edwards, statistically in his first season in college says that he's going to be a great scorer in the pros. Look at James Wiseman. He's a freak of nature athlete. He's gigantic. He's fast. He can move. He's got good hands.
But we only saw 3 college games of him, and I think that truly hurt him. If we would have saw a full season of James Wiseman, I wholeheartedly believe that he would have been hands down the consensus number 1.
Yeah. And then, LaMelo Ball is a 6'7" point guard that, he's got to work on his shooting a little bit, but he's got transcendent passing skills. He's a great passer. And so I think all 3 of those guys may end up being the superstars that everybody's saying weren't in this draft.
I got a question for you about LaMelo Ball, right? And I know I myself am like, I have always evaluated, like I'll say always, I have consistently evaluated college talent just on eye tests alone. Like I've never really dove into it as much as I have this year. And I've learned a lot doing it, especially discussing with other people, right? But one thing that my biggest issue with Ball, and I'm not saying that he's not going to be successful, when you are a point guard, especially in the NBA, and the best thing that anyone can say about when you talk about LaMelo Ball, you said it earlier, what's the best skill that he has in the NBA?
Passing.
Is he a great defender?
No.
Is he a great shooter?
No, but he's a decent shooter.
Okay.
I'm good enough.
I don't based off of what?
Based off of just the fact that he's, I think he's got a solid stroke and he's going to develop into a better shooter as time goes on.
Okay. If you feel that way, that's fine.
Yeah, I feel like he has the makings. We saw him when he was in high school as a sophomore hitting, all those threes in the game. Like he's kind of lost his shot a little bit, but I think that's a little bit over exaggerated because everybody saw what happened with his brother. His first couple of years he struggled and he's gotten better. I don't think he's ever going to be, one of the best shooters in the NBA, but he's going to be capable,
Yeah, my thing is with him, and you feel that way, that's fine. Like we don't always agree, and that's okay. We still have our conversation, right? But when I watched him play professionally in Australia, right, and you go back and you look at the data, not only was his 3-point shooting terrible, but his free throw shooting is terrible, and usually that's a good indication on how you have to be one of the best of all time to ever do it to kind of negate that, right? So he does not project on what NBA experts typically look to be a great shooter. He could develop into maybe a passable shooter. But this is my point, Austin. If you're playing point guard in the NBA, as tall as he is, that's fine. The best thing you do is pass, but your shooting ability is questionable. Your defense is questionable. People will argue that he is a great finisher. Okay, maybe like I don't see that, but okay, I'm not going to push back on that one too much, right? When the best thing you do is handle the ball and you make pretty passes, I think that limits you, especially at the position that he plays, right? Like I don't look at LaMelo Ball and think, boy, this guy is going to be one of the best point guards in the NBA. But I look at a path for a guy like Obi Toppin. I look at a path for a guy like James Wiseman. I say, these guys legitimately could be one of the best at their position, because right now when you look at centers, you look at guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Bam Adebayo, Nikola Jokic, and Joel Embiid. It's 4 guys. You look at the 4s in the NBA. There's Draymond Green,
Anthony Davis.
Well, you could put Anthony Davis 4.
5 and 4.
Right. So Anthony Davis is 1A. Then after that, there's a steep drop off, and you put in guys like Kevin Love, Draymond. Like there's a steep path there.
Porzingis when he's healthy.
Porzingis when he's healthy. So my point is that it's an easier path for one of those two to be one of the best at their position, as opposed to a LaMelo Ball who has to contend with a guy like Steph Curry, a guy like Damian Lillard, a guy like Chris Paul,
John Wall. Even people forget about how good John Wall was before he got hurt.
John Benson, like the list of great point guards in the NBA right now is a very long list, and I see a it's hard for me to imagine LaMelo Ball being it respectfully in there among some of the best. Ja Morant even last season, like I don't.
You make a really good point, and I can't argue with any of that. He does have a much harder road to stardom, probably just because of the position he plays. But I also think of every guy you named, and the one thing they all have in common that LaMelo definitely didn't have in his development was good coaching. Where has he ever played where the coach actually challenged him? Because his daddy ran everything when he was in high school. He wasn't a coach, but he might as well have been. And then he took him out of school to go to Lithuania, which was a joke. They didn't even really play. And
kind of disagree with that, and we can come back to that. But I just want to say I kind of disagree with that.
He never got top level NCAA coaching. He didn't have an Izzo or a Mike
Calipari.
Calipari to kind of teach him how to be a pro and how to be he's got a lot of growing up to do, I think. But I also think that if he does, and if that part of his game catches up with everything else, I do think he has a chance to be pretty good.
Yeah, and I want to say too, like this is why he's so polarizing, because all those same arguments you made against him, he still ended up being the third best, like a top 3 draft pick, right? Because of what his dad did for him. Like he played professional basketball as a teenager.
Right.
Twice in two separate countries. Like he's already traveled. He's already know what it's like to be famous. Since he was young, right? Like he knows what it's like to not be the biggest name in a famous family. You know what I mean? It's like you could make the case that for all those reasons you don't like him, there's some aspects in there to where you can say, you know what, like there's actually shades of good things involved in that as well.
Oh yeah, he's never going to be, the moment's never going to be too big for him, I don't think. He's never going to be starstruck or overwhelmed by the media. I never watched it, but that Ball in the Family show on Facebook had like millions of viewers. Like it was, my wife watched it, and she's not into the NBA at all.
A basketball fan, right?
Right. So, he's that's part of the reason I think why I picked him for Rookie of the Year in our way too early awards that we did. Just because he's gonna have the media attention, he's gonna have the storylines behind him, and he's not gonna shrivel in the limelight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, speaking of media attention, right? You got Obi Toppin falling to the New York Knicks at 8, and he's second on my board, right? I had James Wiseman, I had Obi Toppin, and then I had LaMelo. And I almost want to put Tyrese Halliburton above LaMelo, but I'm going to stick to my guns. It's my first year really being, into it. I'm just going to hold my guys where they are. I'll eat my crow later.
That's always the best way to do it.
Yep, I'm going to stand my ground, and if I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot, right? But Obi Toppin falling to number 8, I thought was a great pickup. I had Emmanuel Quickly 20th on my board, and he went significantly later than that. We have a vested interest within our network on the success of the New York Knickerbockers, right? So, just real quick, and again, like, we're both pretty new at analyzing the draft, right? But based on what you have seen, based on the players that you've analyzed, how do you think the New York Knicks did coming out of this year's draft?
I mean, what more could you ask for? I think it's the first time in almost 2 decades where we can say that the Knicks front office made some smart moves.
Yeah, they're still working on them too, by the way.
And, they were, let's be honest, I don't want to be too mean, but they've been a laughingstock for a while.
It is what it is, man.
Just the moves they make and the draft picks they've had, you can go back and look through every year. I don't name all of them. They've had lots of guys just not pan out. And for Obi Toppin to be there and for them to actually take him, it seems like it kind of just was meant to be. He is a pretty NBA ready player already.
I think he's rookie of the year, like, ready. I think he's like that level.
And, I think a lot more people would agree with you if we had an NCAA tournament. Because I think that's where he would have gotten all the eyeballs on him, and he would have gotten the narrative, and everybody would have seen what he can do, because he was terrific. And Dayton was really good. It wasn't like Dayton normally, where they might win a game in the NCAA tournament and surprise somebody and shock somebody with an upset. They were going to be one of the top teams. They were really good. So, I think that's really the main storyline that hurt him. But ultimately, I think it might be good for his career. He's a New York kid, so he's going to be. He's going to be welcomed with open arms. So,
yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, I mean, coming out of Brooklyn, he knows what it's like to live in Gotham City, right? And we saw how emotional he was that he got to go to his hometown team, right? And all the jokes aside about all the power forwards at the Knicks, they're working on that today. They just got rid of Bobby Porter, they got rid of Taj Gibson, which was surprising, right? Because we know how Tom Thibodeau loves him some Taj Gibson. But they're making room for this kid to be, an impact guy. They could be targeting a point guard in this draft. So you're looking at them having a point guard, Quickly, Barrett, Toppin, and Robinson. That could be a fun young core.
Right. I was just going to say him, RJ Barrett, and Mitchell Robinson are, at the very least, they're going to on the fast break. They're going to be able to get out and run and score some points, those 3. And Emmanuel Quickly's a great pickup for them too. I was with you kind of when I did my first round, research. I figured he'd go a little bit higher than he did. So, you can't be upset with that pick there. They've made some good moves. They've opened up, I think, about $40 million in cap space.
Well, they also brought on this happened a little bit ago. I want to say about a half an hour ago or so. No, about an hour ago. They accepted bringing in Ed Davis's deal from the Utah Jazz. And what this does, it allows Utah to have more cap space to bring in Jordan Clarkson and another player on the mid-level exception, which Utah could be kind of a scary team coming into next year. But
they got Azubuike, right?
They did. They drafted Azubuike, which I was kind of. I like him too, but I thought that he was potentially undrafted. Like, that's why I like him. I was like, he's still worth being able to draft, but I did not see first round talent in him. But he does kind of fit the mold of a Rudy Gobert. So when he's out, they can still run the same type of system, things like that. I digress. But, what bringing in Ed Davis did for the Knicks is they also acquired a couple second round picks in the year 2023. So we're starting to see what, bringing in Rose, bringing in Thibodeau, the changing of the guard in the front office and the decision-making for the New York Knicks, they're kind of running a more modern style front office, which is something that I think they have not done in 15, 20 years. Like, you're talking a long time where it wasn't just a guy who was like, oh, I was one of the greatest coaches of all time. I know how to run. You know what I mean? Or, hey, I've been in the NBA for a long time, holding a job in other places. Let me make basketball decisions.
Let's be honest. Phil Jackson was trying to get himself fired by the end of his time there. There's no 2 ways about it. Like, he was never even there. He wanted to be in California with his young hot girlfriend,
or Montana, you know,
right, or wherever,
with
just
peyote and
exactly
riding in the prairie and
all that Zen Buddhism stuff.
But
he was ready to retire for sure.
But back to the Knicks, right? Like they brought in an agent, you know, to run things, and you know, having these ties. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Obi Toppin is a shared
I think
is a part of that CA agency,
mm-hmm.
right? So he fell to them, and it was like, yeah, he's talented. Two, we know the kid, right? So there's that. When you know a player, it makes things a lot easier, especially if you believe in his talent,
mm-hmm.
right? So it just, to me, all these moves that I see the Knicks making, like, it makes me happy for guys that are network, right? Like guys like Edgar,
mm-hmm.
guys like Chris, guys like, you know, Coach Fa, all these Knicks fans that we have in our group.
It's nice to see them finally take a step back and say, okay, great. We're New York. We can open up all this cap space. We should be a free agent destination, but it hasn't worked. Yeah. And they've spent the last 10 years or 7 or 8 years trying to go from really bad to really good with a couple of signings. And that's just really not the way to do it in professional sports of any kind, really. We've seen lots of in baseball and in with 76ers in Philadelphia, a lot of times you've got to build it organically over a few years. And I think finally they have a front office that's going to be around long enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I think the whole agent becoming a GM thing is going to be the wave of the future. It's worked for the Lakers. It seems like it's working for them. They know the game, they know the players, and they have relationships with a lot of these guys. And so far, it seems like it's worked pretty good. So
yeah,
I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I mean, what's the saying? It's not what you know, but who you know.
Right.
And I think that's working out well for the Knicks, like I said, because we're seeing front offices like the Boston Celtics, like the New Orleans Pelicans, like the Oklahoma City Thunder acquire all these picks and things like that. Oh, and then let's look at Detroit Pistons. They brought in Troy Weaver, who, little known fact, he was a part of the front office for the Oklahoma City Thunder. What do we see him doing now? Acquiring picks, future first round picks. And it's like, oh, okay, you learned a little bit from Sam Presti, right? So it's interesting to see teams like the Knicks, who my morning after reaction to the draft is like the Kings, the Knicks, and the Pistons, we're all winners in the draft. Like, when is the last time that we could say good job to all of those franchises in the same draft?
Well, they all kind of have new front offices, at least within the last year or two. They've all kind of changed over, who's in charge there. So maybe it'll finally kind of switch, because it only goes so long that teams stay bad, and eventually, something's got to give for them, and they turn it around. So hopefully for those teams that they do, I think, like you said, they all, had a pretty good draft. You brought up the Kings. I wanted to kind of branch off from the draft a little bit and talk about the Bogdanovich thing going on.
Yeah, it's really weird.
A sign and trade that was supposedly agreed upon, but then Bogdanovich said he never agreed to go to Milwaukee and nixed the deal and is going to become a free agent. To be totally honest, even with that trade, I didn't think that the Bucks got enough for mortgaging their entire future to keep Giannis around. It sounded like he was going to sign his Supermax deal, but that doesn't necessarily mean he was going to stay for sure. And, it's just, this has got to be their nightmare scenario, because they gave up 3 picks for Jrue Holiday, and Jrue Holiday's good, but 3 first-round picks and a couple of pick swaps.
And 2 pick swaps, yes, sir.
Is insane. That's like the same thing that the Clippers gave up for Paul George, knowing that Kawhi Leonard was coming with.
It was very it reminded a lot of people, and I saw the shirt on Twitter, from what the Lakers gave up for Anthony Davis. It was very reminiscent of that.
So now, if I'm Giannis, I'm looking at the Bucks roster and saying, okay, we made a little bit of an upgrade at point guard, and even if we had gotten Bogdanovich, we added another great knockdown shooter who's going to help. But I'm looking around and seeing a team full of complementary pieces without a real second superstar and no future picks. And then one of the teams that he's been most linked to down in Miami has their picks, has cap space, has some of the best young talent in the NBA. And I don't know why he wouldn't want to go there. I almost think it made the decision to leave even easier for him.
Yeah, it's really weird. And one thing I want to bring up, a couple things actually. One, I saw that the Bucks waived Ersan Ilyasova, who was a part of that deal to bring in Bogdan Bogdanovic. They paired him with Dante DiVincenzo, who was, you know, the big name in that deal, and then also DJ Wilson, who's kind of, you know, didn't really, we'll just say didn't work out in Milwaukee out of Wisconsin. So they got rid of Ersan Ilyasova. But I do want to remind everybody that the Kings do have Bogdan as a restricted free agent. So although he may want to sign somewhere else, they can match that deal. So it's not impossible for that deal to work out just with different names or picks attached to that to send Bogdan over to Milwaukee. Now, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, this is not the first time that an international player has kind of made it known that he didn't want to go to Milwaukee. Do you remember Leon? That was supposed to be one of the top picks. He came out before the draft and said that he might not even come to the NBA if he got picked by Milwaukee. And they cited not having a very international population of people there. And it's just, you know, that was kind of something interesting that made me think, you know, why do these guys that are international players seem to not like the idea of going to Milwaukee? But it was just something was interesting.
Well, I mean, it's not a you know, big secret that Milwaukee, Wisconsin, you know, as far as, you know, demographics go. Well, not only that, but if you're looking at just like the demographics of, you know, the civilians and stuff there, that I don't want to get off on a tangent here, right? But I mean, even the events that happened this year, right, in Wisconsin, wasn't too far away from Milwaukee, and that was the factor that I wrote about in an article on Giannis on offtheballnetwork.com about which way does he go. And I thought one of the contributing factors, even if it's the tiniest reason, you know, the events that happen in Wisconsin has to be in the back of his mind, especially as a new dad, you know, so.
I look at those issues with the police department and Sterling Brown too. You know, that doesn't help.
Yeah, and then you look at a place like at Miami, who, you know, very diverse demographic, a little bit more fun of a nightlife, I would imagine, compared to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, year round. All of those things contribute into it. You can even look at Dallas, Texas, a little bit more of a international flavor there. Obviously, Golden State has a, you know, pretty international demographic there.
Dallas's entire team seems like they're international. So
correct.
They must like it there.
Yeah, and then Toronto, obviously being in a different country, you know, we don't need to get into that, right? So I do think, though, going back to the point that I was just bringing up, the Kings could still keep, even though that they drafted well in this draft and they got a couple of good really wing players that I think that they're going to look to try to develop, they could keep Bogdan on a restricted deal and then ship him out, and maybe they couple one of these new draft picks now, you know what I mean, and maybe that makes the deal a little bit better. So it'll be interesting to see. But like you mentioned that there's not a lot of big name, like that hasn't stopped Milwaukee from being the number one seed a couple years in a row without a true superstar. And I think adding a Drew Holiday and a Bogdan Bogdanovic, they're a little bit more of a contemporary offense that, you know, Coach Bud has not ran in his time in Milwaukee. I think that it could actually be one of the better Bucks teams that Giannis has played with, but it may not be a number one seed again, especially with how strong the East is getting.
Right. Well, I'll go as far as to say this: unless Bud changes the way he coaches that team, if Giannis stays in Milwaukee and Mike Budenholzer's the coach, he's never going to win an NBA title. I'll say that right now. I don't think the way the team's constructed, the way they play, you know, kind of just one style and that's all they've got. You know, he could develop a three, he could develop a mid-range jumper and be the greatest ever. And I don't see a path where they're good enough to beat, you know, the Nets or the Lakers or, you know, the Warriors, if they were healthy, was one that I was expecting to be pretty good. But I just think right now the NBA is so deep with so many teams that could, you know, make it to the finals and win the title. Milwaukee doesn't scare me. They still don't. Even with Drew Holiday, even with Bogdanovic, they don't seem like they're a threat to beat, you know, the Nets, if, you know, unless they just beat themselves, or, you know, Miami, you know. So I don't think if Giannis stays, I think he'll go down as the best player in NBA history to not have a title. So
surpassing a couple of really big names there on that list. So I just want to point out that's high praise.
Right.
High praise.
I mean, I think, statistically, the way his career's going, he's going to end up at the top of a lot of, career leaderboards, and he's going to win a lot of awards. That's foregone conclusion, I think. I don't think that, for one, I think he needs another, like a Batman, and he needs to take the Robin role when it comes to the playoffs. Unless he just completely develops a great perimeter game in the next year or two, I just don't see a way that he's ever going to be able to be the guy that handles the ball all the time and takes all the last second shots, and they rely on him to do everything like that. Just the way his game is, I think they already put too much on him. I think he'd be, a little bit more better used if he didn't always bring the ball down the court. It kind of makes them one-dimensional. And I don't see where they're going with the roster that they have. They're going to be a really good team. I'll give you that. They're going to be a really good team. I'm not saying they're not going to be good. I just don't
right.
I just don't think these trades or these moves really move the needle enough to make them a championship team.
Do you think, now we brought up him potentially going to Miami, and rumor has it that if he is going to Miami, that deal will also include a Tyler Hero. We talked about, what that means in the future, right? With them having to, they're losing out on a guy they have restricted, free agency rights on. They won't have those same types of bird rights on a Duncan Robinson or a Kendrick Nunn, right? So you're sacrificing a lot of your roster to bring him in. And we talked about how congested that team would be in the paint, right? Without the lack of shooting eventually, maybe not year one, but year two, definitely. Unless they were to bring in guys on the mid-level, which could very well happen. But let's just say, for instance, right, they trade away Tyler Hero, they get rid of they can't afford to keep Duncan Robinson and pay all three of those guys the way that they are. It just won't happen. Someone will give him a Kyle Korver or a JJ Redick.
I was actually just hearing that an anonymous NBA GM said they expect him to command $18 to $20 million on his next contract.
That's exactly my point, which is
they're not going to be able to afford him.
That's going to be more than double of the mid-level exception, which is probably the only other way that they could keep him, right? So they're not going to have Duncan Robinson. They won't have Tyler Hero if they trade him. They certainly won't have Kendrick Nunn either. It's going to be really congested in the paint. Now, again, Jimmy Butler, by that point, 2 seasons from now, will be significantly older. How effective will he be? And Bam Adebayo and Giannis aren't great creators for other people without shooting around them.
Right.
I think that they would certainly be the more talented team in Miami. I'm not going to deny that at all. I think fit-wise, though, if you surround Giannis with Holiday and with Bogdanovich and with Chris Middleton and with Brook Lopez, you could still certainly be formidable on both sides of the ball. Fit-wise, I think it works. At the end of the day, though, it does take stars to beat stars, and that's where I think Miami would have you make that deal, and you just figure it out later.
I mean, I would trust Eric Spoelstra to take that kind of talent and figure it out. Wouldn't you? I think amassing as much talent as you can is the best way to go in the NBA. And if you can't get a bunch of superstars, you try to get a bunch of draft picks and draft a bunch of superstars. So one way or the other, everybody's trying to acquire assets to get as much talent as they can. And whichever way you choose to go about it. Miami's proven to be one of those franchises that always pulls a rabbit out of their hat when you think they don't have a move. And Giannis will be a free agent next year if he doesn't sign an extension. So he could just go there. They do have cap space.
Yeah.
So
they've already asked Bam to hold off on his extension to where they could.
They wouldn't have to trade for him if they just waited another year. And Duncan Robinson is one of the best knockdown shooters in the NBA, and he's been great for him. But I think they can at least piece together a couple veterans or young guys on lower contracts that can kind of make up for that to an extent. I mean, they're not going to be completely as good as he is, but I could see a world where they have Tyler Hero and Giannis and whoever the point guard is at the time, maybe Kendrick Nunn.
Maybe Tyler Hero's the point guard.
I don't think it's going to be Dragic, but it might be. And Jimmy Butler, he'll be a little bit older, but he's not an old man. And with Bam's Bam's obviously going to be there. So, I could see them having a really formidable team, but I agree with you that I don't know that it's the best, fit wise for him to go there. I'd like to see him go to Dallas.
I do that. One, Kristaps would have to, figure out a way to stay healthy, dadgummit, because he's going to miss like all of December basketball and into January basketball. And they did draft and trade well. They added Josh Richardson. They got Tyrell Terry in the draft. They got Tyler Bay from Colorado in the draft. So, they got some of the better names that were projected to go higher on some people's board. I'm not a big Tyler Bay fan. I'm not a big Tyrell Terry fan, but I get the intrigue. I had certain prospects rated higher, and there was a lot of that in this draft for me. But if those work out, Dallas is still going to be a good team with young talent, and they can just bring in a Giannis in free agency and have good young talent and be a whole lot of international flair. I think that's where I would love to see him go, especially with, how taxes and things like that work in Dallas too, compared to a Miami, Florida. So there's a lot of intrigue and upside for that. Obviously, Toronto
Cuban is a great owner. Everybody likes playing for him. He's one of the most innovative guys in the league. And, also I think it would be great for him to be on a team with a point guard that's not going to let him they're not going to have Giannis bringing the ball down like the Bucks are. He's not going to have to do all that heavy lifting and have that ridiculous usage rate. And I almost think that's why, a Russell Westbrook and him combination might work, because Russell Westbrook wants that usage rate. He wants to do all the heavy lifting. And, Giannis kind of needs somebody to do that, I think. I just don't like him being the guy that brings the ball down all the time, initiating the offense, because it usually ends up with him putting his head down and driving, through a guy and getting an offensive foul or dunking it on him. And it's shown time, 2 times now that it's not probably going to work in the playoffs. And we saw when he got hurt, their offense ran so much smoother through Chris Middleton. It was crazy. They
looked
the
more
ball
like
so much better.
A typical offense. It wasn't just like a 1 in 4 out. Yeah.
There's something about Giannis being so dominant and so good that everybody on the court just kind of stands there and expects him to take over, and I just think the best usage for him is with somebody like a Luka Doncic, where he doesn't have the ball all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, the pick and roll scenarios between a Giannis and Luka with a KP in the corner, a Giannis KP pick and roll with Luka standing outside, it's incredible. Pin downs, flex route, or flex patterns, things like that. A lot of stuff you could do with that.
Right, they definitely have a lot of options. I worry about Porzingis. When I think about him, it brings up nightmares of guys like Bill Walton and Greg Oden and Sam Bowie, big guys that are that big, that have knee problems or foot problems or back problems. They don't ever get over it. Really, it just these injuries may follow him his whole career. I hope they don't. But they would only have Luka and Giannis, right? Two of the best, 25 and under, 26 and under guys in the league.
2 top 10 talents in the league. Maybe even top 5. Maybe even top 5. We can get into that at another time, right?
So, there's a lot of interesting options for Giannis. I don't think if winning titles is his number one thing, I don't know if Milwaukee's the place he's going to do it. I don't think it is.
Yeah, it would definitely be the harder road. They have already strapped themselves with money. They have already gotten rid of picks. The guys that they have around Giannis, it is up to Giannis. You know what I mean? Like, and like you said, maybe him being kind of a 1B a la, maybe like a LeBron James, Anthony Davis, where Anthony Davis is still one of the best players in the NBA, but it is awful nice to have a guy who's a ball handler be able to facilitate an offense, right?
Think about how nice it is in the last couple minutes of a tight game in the fourth quarter, when you don't have to sit there and think to yourself, God, I got to do something or we're not going to win. Like you can rely on somebody else to kind of, the pressure just is not nearly as much.
We have to do something so we can win, right? Like Anthony Davis is still involved in those winning plays, whether it be an offensive rebound and putback, whether it be, a pick and roll and him cutting hard to the basket or popping out for an open shot. Like, there's a lot of ways that Anthony Davis is still involved in the winning play without having to be in an isolation type situation.
Right. Without it being, in the huddle in the last second shot, they just look at Anthony Davis and say, all right, go make a play for us.
Go stand on the other side of the court all by yourself. We'll be over here kind of spread out if you want to kick the ball out, but we'd prefer you just to go ahead and try to make something happen.
Let's be honest, NBA stars have egos, big egos. They don't trust everybody on their team to be in those situations and perform. So just the ability to say to yourself, I know this guy can do it too, is got to be a big help for anybody. And I just, some guys like Russell Westbrook and probably James Harden seem content to just, do everything and have this super high usage rate and get their stats. But, winning, but I heard a good saying, the difference between a good team and a championship team is sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And, guys have to sacrifice a little
knowing
bit.
Their role.
Right. For the team, people don't talk about it enough, but guys like Chris Bosh and Kevin Love doing what they did, becoming the third wheel, of a championship roster when they were like bona fide stars on their teams. That's hard to do. Chris Bosh was a perennial all-star, top 10 scorer in the league.
All NBA level talent. Yeah.
And spent 3 or 4 years in Miami getting made fun of by everybody. But he won 2 rings. So, if that's what's more important to you, then that's what you got to kind of do.
Yeah, he became more famous for, sliding in and out of interviews around, his guys and stuff like that. So
being compared to a velociraptor.
Yeah, I mean, how perfect was that he was a Raptor, right? So
right.
But yeah, Austin, I think that we have covered a good amount of the news. We could certainly fall into the rabbit hole of something that hasn't happened yet. And, what do you think about James Harden? Is he a Brooklyn Net or a Philadelphia 76er?
I do think, one thing I just want to point out real quick for everybody is, Daryl Morey's already kind of at it. He's been the president for a couple weeks, and suddenly they got a couple guys that can shoot when they didn't have any shooters, and he cleared $10 million in cap space kind of overnight. So.
Oh, and he got a couple of draft picks too, I want to say too, right? So.
And then too, just the other one I wanted to touch on just real fast is how in the world did Oklahoma City pull that off with Danny Green? I mean, they turned him into so much draft capital. It was unreal. They
turned him into a first and a second, and they got Al Horford for a shovel. And the funny thing, I wrote about this on the article that we have, that transaction article on offtheballnetwork.com, where the beautiful thing about the way that Al Horford's ridiculous contract is set up is that every year that goes by, it declines by $500,000. So it's $27.5 million now. Next season, it'll be 27. And the season after that, it'll be 26.5. With all these picks, and it's almost every year that there's some superstar that wants to get out. An expiring $26 million makes a trade for a superstar pretty doable, and having extra draft picks, makes a trade pretty doable, right? So even looking at the macro instead of the micro with the way that Oklahoma City is doing this, right? Like getting a declining contract every season. Oh, and Horford may still be a pretty daggum good player. Maybe it was
I was just going to say, he's not a bum either. I mean, he's kind of perfect for what they want. He's not going to be good enough to, ruin their plans of a rebuild where they want to, make those picks more valuable. But he eats up a lot of cap space that they needed to fill, and he is a pro. He's a legitimate NBA pro,
and he's selfless too. He's not like one of these guys that's like, I have a max contract, I need the offense to run through me. Like he makes plays for other people. He sets screens, he rebounds, he plays defense. He does he plays winning basketball.
Right. I think he'll be a good locker room presence for a team that's obviously trying to get really, really young, and they're going to be pretty young in the near future here.
How funny do you think conversations between Al Horford and Alexei Pokusevski are going to be?
I don't know.
I can't wait to watch Horford back down Alexei in practice. It's going to be funny because Alexei is like 8 feet tall. Yeah, he's like 8 feet tall, 90 pounds. Soaking wet.
Like you can break him in half if you stare at him too hard.
Oh, and Steven Adams, I'm sure, is going to have fun with him too, mate. Yeah.
Right. It could be a fun little team they have there. They're not probably going to be in contention for much, but
they need to have some sort of like what's the NFL show that they have before every season where
Hard Knocks.
They need to have some sort of like Oklahoma City Hard Knocks where there's just everyone making fun of Alexei Pokusevski's weight.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I don't remember who said it, but I saw on Twitter the other day. The Oklahoma City Thunder almost have so many picks that you could take a guy off the street that doesn't know anything about basketball, and he's going to hit on at least one of them.
Yeah.
And so, they're almost guaranteed to get a pretty big time star in one of these upcoming drafts. I have 17 picks now.
I've lost track. I haven't sat down and looked at every single deal that they've made yet. I'm going to do that probably tonight and into tomorrow when I keep that running transaction article up to date. I'll have a more concrete answer for you then. But between them and the Pelicans, I think that, every draft is going to alternate between, the Oklahoma City Thunder select, the New Orleans Pelicans select,
the Pelicans have a lot of picks too.
Start sprinkling in the Pistons because they're moving people and getting trade assets. So
I'll tell you what, I like the Pelicans. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple years they're not a free agent destination because they're going to have a lot of picks. I think guys are going to want to come play with Zion.
Brandon,
they're going to be, they're set up to be really good for a long time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, they do have George Hill, who a team could look at his contract number and say he's going to help us win a ring, and here's a first round pick later for your troubles.
Right.
And Drew and I almost said Drew Bledsoe. Wow, wrong sport. Eric Bledsoe, although he is easy to make fun of for his playoff, blunders and stuff like that, he's still a good defender.
Yes.
He's still a terrific athlete. He's at his contract value, which I want to say is less than $20 million a year, which if James Harden is turning down $50 million, Eric Bledsoe is certainly worth $18 to $20 million.
Right. Nick Batum just opted into $27 million, and he doesn't even really play.
Yeah, right. Like that's like some Luol Deng stuff for you LA Laker fans, right?
Right.
So, Timothy Mozgov. But anyway, with all of that being said, these younger teams, it's going to be. I have a close eye on Detroit. For anybody who wants to look at and say who's the team that should I pay attention to for the next 3-4 seasons, look at Detroit because they still have their stars in Blake Griffin. I say stars maybe loosely right now, right? But Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose, they still have.
If Blake Griffin comes back from his injury, anything like he was before, he's an NBA, he's a superstar. He's terrific. He had one of the best seasons he's ever had before he got hurt. It just remains to be seen if he's going to be healthy. And
then Derrick Rose, who was a lot of people's Sixth Man of the Year candidate on a reasonable $7 to $8 million contract, awfully gettable, right? So, coming out of that Oklahoma City, front office organization where we move players and get draft picks and we sign superstars at some point, Detroit might end up being because they did draft Killian Hayes, Isaiah Stewart, and Sadiq Bey. 3 really good prospects. I'm high on 2 of them. I'm not a big Isaiah Stewart guy. I had him as an early second. But like I said, I get the intrigue of him, right? But Killian Hayes, I had him in my top 10, and then Sadiq Bey, I had him in my top 15. So
I knew you were pretty high on Sadiq Bey, and I liked his game too, for sure.
I can't believe he fell to 19. So, but yeah, Austin,
good for them.
Absolutely. I think that
I hate to say it, but I think the NBA league offices should be worried about all these teams amassing all these draft picks and selling off all their players. I think they didn't really like what the 76ers did, and I think teams are starting to copy it, and they don't want teams to be bad, obviously. So it might end up becoming a little bit of a problem if it keeps going this way, but it is probably the easiest way to build a bad team into a good team. So
well, what would you have them do? Because they already introduced the stipend rule, which prevents teams from trading. And we saw this after the Boston Celtics got that coup of draft picks from the Brooklyn Nets, right? They've already introduced things like the stipend rule, which prevents teams from trading consecutive first-round picks that belong to them. They can, if they get it, that's why the Golden State Warriors could trade their pick this season and then their pick next year, right? Because it didn't belong to them. It belonged to the Wolves. So they can do stuff like that. they've already fluctuated the draft odds. So even if you are the worst team in basketball, the 5th worst team or the 6th worst team could still end up with the number 1 draft pick. Like, what else do you do to kind of prevent something like this from happening?
I don't know what you do. I think Adam Silver, that's why he's, the commissioner. I think he'll come up with something if he needs to. But honestly, I don't think they should try to do anything about it. I feel like the front office pressured the 76ers to get rid of
Colangelo.
No, before Colangelo.
Oh, you're putting me on about. Yeah, that guy.
His name.
That guy.
No, I don't remember his name, but you guys know who we're talking about. The guy that basically. Oh,
did I lose you? I think I lost. Are you there?
Hey,
you hey, there he is.
Yeah, everything blinked out for a minute.
No,
I was just saying, I feel like the GM that the 76ers had was, publicly spoke about wanting to be as bad as possible to get the top pick as often as they could. And I think that's why, the NBA kind of stepped in and put Colangelo there. I mean, he wasn't obviously the guy I would pick. He didn't do much better. But I think they got scared at the idea that teams were going to start copying that. But I just think they should just let it go and let teams do with their assets what they want to do.
Sam Hinkie.
Thank you. Yes.
I
think he was on track to turn the 76ers. If he was still there, I think the 76ers would be in a lot better position than they are now. Just because, they missed some pretty high picks, but if anytime you can get a guy like Embiid and a guy like Simmons, I would say that the process overall would have been more of a success if that hadn't happened. But I do think it was a success. And I think the league should kind of leave teams to run themselves however they choose.
Okay. Well, I may have misunderstood what you said. I thought that you were saying that the league needs to step in and stop this from happening.
I think that they think they might have to. I personally like
you're putting yourself in their shoes, and you're not happy right now with teams.
Right. I think Adam Silver is probably worried about that becoming too much of a trend where, at some point, if it gets out of hand, 8 or 9 teams are actively not trying to win games. It's not good financially for the league, but I just think it's, I think the team should be allowed to use their assets however they want.
I think you could argue that either way. I certainly see what you're saying, but I also think you don't want to keep a team together that isn't gonna compete well enough, right? And that equally hurts fan interest as well, right? What's another way that you can keep fans interested? You can keep fans interested with the hope that you draft a Golden State Warriors rotation or an Oklahoma
new
City.
Young star we have every year.
Yep. Look at all these draft picks we have, and look at the Boston Celtics. With
I think the rise of analytics is definitely partially to blame for that, because I think back in the 90s and the early 2000s, fans were kind of casual fans were kind of content with their team, making the playoffs every year, but not really competing, be kind of middle of the road. Now they can quantify everything and say, hey, if we want to win a championship, we can't do this anymore. And this is the way to do it. There's so much more information.
And we've gotten lazy too with our takes on basketball. The conversation always ends up coming back to how many rings does he have, right? So when you're comparing great players, at some point, though, we could talk about that ad nauseum. That's a whole nother show. But I would argue, though, however, that acquiring those picks, one, it keeps fans optimistic for the future, and then 2, it keeps a star from being in one spot and one being unhappy, which no fan wants to see a star be unhappy in their uniform, right? It's just disrespectful to a lot of folks, right? And then you end up forming these teams that are really fun to watch for the casual fan, which the NBA is always trying to reach out to the casual fan. How do we make the game more appealing for, not just us, but our wives? How can we get the guys' wives to want to come in and watch a basketball game? Oh, let's put James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant in a soap opera that they just so happen to play in the NBA as well, right? Let's try that.
We're going to mic one of them up every game for the entire season and just, put it on national TV as much as possible.
Well, even the bad teams too, what we were just saying too with Oklahoma City, how cool would it be for Al Horford and Steven Adams to be like the Bash Brothers from Mighty Ducks just going up to Alexei Pokachevsky and putting him in a trash can and tipping him over.
There you go. That would be funny.
Yeah, right.
And think about like Oklahoma City. They could legitimately make 3 trades and give up 3 first-round picks in each trade to get us like how what seems to be the recipe to get a guy that's a star now is you trade 3 or 4 picks for him. They could do that like 3 times and get good overnight. Really, if
and include pick swaps. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they'd still have picks. So I think whatever teams want to do, however they want to build and go forward, I think is the best for the league in general. Like you said, constant change is an easy way to keep people interested.
Yeah, people get bored. Even with the team like the Golden State Warriors, everyone's like, all right, this is getting boring. We know they're
right. Everybody was ready to break them up.
Let's start creating a narrative that that actually turned into be something true. Like what's the quickest way to break up a really good team? Let's make them not like each other. Let's say, is Kevin Durant or Steph Curry the better player on this team? And start creating that, a little bit of friction that probably wasn't there when everything was all fresh, new, and exciting for both of those guys. Right. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, Austin, I want to go ahead and wrap a bow on this. We've been in this for an hour and a half. I know that you got a lot of stuff that you're working on right now for the network. I got some stuff that I got to catch up on as far as the articles and stuff. And we got a great show that I can't wait for that we've had Lee Branscombe from Hoops Prospects and from the Which Carolina podcast. He was on our show right before the draft. We talked about, can't miss guys who, don't buy the hypes and who our biggest sleepers are going to be. We're going to have him back on this Sunday in a kind of a running segment where we're going to give draft grades out to each NBA team and how we project that each one of them did. So I got to come correct because I know that Lee is on his stuff, right? So we'll wrap a bow on this show, man.
I need to get to work on that as well. So
absolutely. But Austin, I alluded that we got a lot of stuff in the works, man. What do you got for the people? Just kind of keep their palate wet.
Well, I'm still doing the fantasy football stuff. I actually just posted an article. I think it posted yesterday, or I may not have done it till this morning. It kind of all runs together. It was a draft article about the best and worst draft picks for every NBA franchise. It was just a fun little thing that I thought was interesting to look at. There was some pretty big name guys that ended up being pretty bad, like, Adam Morrison and things like that. So it was interesting to see what could have been for teams that also, traded away the rights to a Kobe Bryant or a Dirk Nowitzki, So it was interesting. It was fun to look at. So I've got that just went up. I'm working on an opinion article about the Milwaukee Bucks and this whole thing with Bogdan and Drew Holiday. And it's kind of just what we talked about. So I won't go into too much detail with it, but I'm working on that. So that should be pretty good.
All right, cool stuff. Yeah. And I already alluded to our Sunday episode that we're going to have. It's going to be on, and we'll have the times and all that stuff available for everybody in the near future. Right. But it's going to be a good time. Like I said, we had Lee on before. He's not only a friend of our show, but a friend of our network as well. Right. So it's going to be a good time having him on. Well, actually, it's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I was looking that up while I was just kind of buying some time. So 6 p.m. Sunday evening.
Good to know. Thanks for letting me know.
Absolutely. Yep. So
I find this stuff out the same time as you guys do.
You're nobody special.
Steven runs this thing, and I just pretend like I know what I'm talking about.
You're just along for the ride. No, that's not true because you locked up the guest that we had on earlier today, which I don't want to forget.
That was cool.
Yeah. Big shout out to David Shepard. Just really appreciate him being on.
I'm telling you what, if you liked what you heard from him today, go check out his YouTube. He's got some really thoughtful, great commentary on a lot of issues surrounding sports. With the Milwaukee Bucks deciding not to play that game. He does a review of the Last Dance documentary. That's pretty cool. Every piece of content the guy puts out is very well thought out, and you can tell he puts a lot of work into it. So go check that out for sure. He obviously doesn't need any plugs from us. Seems like he's got enough on his plate, but I just want to thank him again for coming on. That was pretty cool. I was really excited when he agreed to come on in the first place.
Yeah, and that was a great time. And I just want to put out real quick, I have that running transaction article is currently not up to date, but it will be tomorrow at some point. And not only are the trades and the transactions on there, but unlike what some of the other sites do, where they try to reel you in to pay money to get the analysis and the trade grades and stuff like that, or making you subscribe to certain things to be able to unlock the the access of the article. It's all on there. It's all inclusive. Just go to offtheballnetwork.com. The link is scrolling there at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, sir.
And you can go there. You can have access to my analysis on the trade for both teams. You can get the trade grades all included, and you can stay current on all of the things that are going on in the NBA.
Right,
and,
man. That always gets me. I always want to see the trade grades, and it's always behind a paywall everywhere you look. It's like
everywhere
I can't get a single team's grade unless I, pay this or pay that. And so I'm excited to check that out for sure.
Yeah, that's all up there, and I got some catching up to do today. Unlike Woj and Shams and all those guys who do a phenomenal job, I have to go and do other things too. I'm a dad of soon to be 4, and I'm also in the Navy, so like I got stuff I got to do. But I do enjoy keeping it up to date.
I wonder sometimes if guys like that have a life outside of their job at all, or if that's just all they do. I mean, props to them for doing it, but
yeah, I mean, because one, I'm sure that they're pretty handsomely compensated, right?
Oh, yeah,
and then 2, it keeps us up to date, which is what we try to do in return for all of you viewers and listeners that give us any time and attention that we obviously greatly appreciate, right, Austin?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Just like with David coming on, anybody that takes time out of their day to listen to us talk about basketball, we really appreciate it. And so thank you to everybody that supports the show, everybody that listens to the show, everybody that watches the show. Thanks to David. Thanks to you, Steven. Thanks to everybody at Off the Ball Network. We're all, everybody's great.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for this episode here for the Breaking the Game podcast. For my co-host, Austin Carr, which you can find on Twitter at AustinCarr10. You can follow me at Steven BTG. You can follow the show at BTG NBA Pod at Twitter and Instagram. For the Off the Ball Network, we just want to thank everybody for your love and support. It's all appreciated. It's not just lip service. It keeps us going. It keeps us motivated. Thank you guys so much. You guys have been awesome. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.
And please enjoy the video that I did not play at the beginning at the risk of not having enough time to talk to David. So here you go.
Well.